Okay, here we are at Grace Grounding again. I'm glad to be back with you. And today I'm going to hit on a very controversial, difficult topic, but I feel that it needs to be talked about. I've already hit it a couple of times before and I got a bit of a response, but I want to hit it again. And the reason I do is because it seems to be getting polarized in our culture right now. And I have a personal interest in this because as a young girl who really was not comfortable in their own skin, I had gender dysphoria, except you didn't talk about it back then. So I just kind of had to suffer by myself. I did go to counseling at one point when I was a little bit older, but again, it just really wasn't something I felt comfortable talking about to anyone. I just felt ashamed. And I don't think it's something that you should be ashamed to talk about. I think it's something you should be able to talk about and work through. Definitely encourage that, especially in young people who are struggling with it. It is a real thing. But my concern is that we are encouraging kids to not just talk about it, but maybe make decisions that will alter their lives permanently in some cases. In many cases, in fact, in a way that they might deeply regret. And I am so glad that those opportunities were not available to me when I was that age and going through that gender dysphoria. But I'm going to show you today, I'm going to comment on an interview by Chloe Cole with Jordan Peterson and she was in the situation of not being able to work through the difficulty that she was having before she made decisions that she now deeply regrets. Let's take a look at that.
Hello, everyone watching and listening on YouTube and on the Daily Wire platform, associated podcasts. We have a rough one today, so buckle up. I'm speaking with Chloe Cole. She started her transition at 12 years old, puberty blockers and testosterone at 13, and had a double mastectomy at 15 years old. She is now a strong advocate against gender ideology and seeks legally to hold those propelling it forward accountable. Hello, Chloe. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Thanks for agreeing to talk to me today and to everybody who's watching and listening. You've been through quite a complicated experience, to say the least, for the last 5 or 6 years, and you've decided in recent months to go public with your story and also to initiate some legal proceedings against the medical professionals who, what would you say, aided you in your exciting journey. And so do you want to tell us the situation you're in now and tell us about what's happened to you since you emerged from childhood?
Yeah, so at the age of 12, I started experiencing some gender dysphoria and on the path of medical transition at the age of 13, starting with blockers and then moving on to hormones. And at 15, I got a double mastectomy. But it turned out that it wasn't the best decision for me, and I stopped transitioning at the age of 16.
Let's go back to when you were 12. Well, about when did you hit puberty?
I started developing at around the age of 9, if not a little bit earlier.
Do you remember if that changed you emotionally?
It was really difficult for me, actually.
Chloe talks about, puberty hitting her at 9, which, boy, am I glad that, we didn't have the hormones and milk and food and stuff that we do now, because I'm telling you, I think that's why. My personal opinion, I think most of history, girls have been having periods and developing starting at around, 12 to 14 is when that really hits. Not 9, not 8. My goodness. So I already think that that's an issue that has nothing to do with what we're talking about today. But I feel for her, really, I do. It just seems like you got to hit it sooner than is even necessary. But anyway, all that aside, it did not start for me until around 12. And I think, again, that's because I wasn't getting all that stuff that they're getting today. Back when I was 9, I did start developing at 12, but that did not get a period at all. I actually didn't get one because of a condition This happens to dancers and sometimes swimmers and people that are very athletic, girls that are very athletic. I only had one period between the ages when I would have started into 19, and that was because a doctor gave me progesterone tablets trying to get it started, thinking that it would continue on its own, but it did not. I was ill prepared for it. I was not comfortable with it. It was just, to me, it was just it just signaled again becoming a woman that I didn't want to become.
Are you interested in are you interested in mathematics, or are you more literary in your orientation?
Definitely more literary, and I'm also a bit of an artist. I've always liked drawing from a pretty young age, as far back as I can remember.
And so what do you do on the hobby side? Like if you're just left to your own devices, what kind of activities would you engage in?
Usually either illustration or video games.
And so would you regard yourself as a creative person?
Yeah.
Okay, see, that's relevant too, because so creativity is associated with this personality trait, openness. And open people have pretty mutable identities. It's sort of the hallmark of being creative, right? Is a creative person isn't that stable in their identity. And I don't mean in the negative emotion sense. I mean, they can be one person or another. They're changing. That mutability is part of being creative. And so in your situation, if you had social difficulties, if you had high levels of negative emotion, if you were characterized by bodily self-consciousness and you were creative, then you're a pretty good candidate for the idea that your gender might not be properly aligned with your physiology.
Creativity, I really relate to her. What kind of a learner was she and so forth, what kind of a student, and not mathematical. That was me, not math and science geared at all. I totally went the right brain direction. Creativity, literary, good writer. I could write a paper. I could read and test well. I was really good as long as it was in grammar or any kind of the language arts, history, communications, things like that. I did well in those classes, but not in the math and sciences. I did not do well. My brain is not wired that way. And I think it's interesting that he said people that have gender dysphoria issues tend to be more creative. So interesting about that.
Okay, so when you were 12, you started therapy. And why was that and what happened?
I was about 11 when I got my first phone, and I started using social media. Very, very image-oriented.
Right.
And
Right.
It further reinforced and worsened my body image issues. I was just force-fed a lot of content that was just very difficult to take in.
Okay, so tell me about that in some detail. So you're using Instagram. It's a very image-oriented platform. And you said that was really hard on you. You alluded to the fact that you were looking at socially approved images of women, let's say voluptuous women, and you were drawing a negative conclusion in relationship to yourself. And so exactly how did that play out day to day?
I started comparing myself a lot to my family and the other girls around me. I mean, a lot of my female family members are larger chested, but I got the smaller breasted genes, and I was really quite insecure about this. And even though I hit puberty earlier than my other peers, a lot of them were outgrowing me, and I felt like I just couldn't keep up with other women.
I did not have to deal with social media because, like I've said before, I'm somewhat of a dinosaur. I was born well before cell phones came out, at least not where regular people had them. I didn't have to worry about social media, thank goodness. There was enough pressure at school and bullies and things like that right there in your face, rather than having to deal with them both at school and later when you got home online. So I'm really glad that I didn't have to deal with that. That's an added pressure that kids have today. More reason to talk these things out, to demystify their gender confusion, or maybe they're not confused about what gender they are, but they're just having a lot of issues because they're in adolescence. for goodness sake. It's a hard time. It's a struggling time for anybody, pretty much. And then when you add the gender dysphoria to it, I did not have an outlet for that. I did not have a way to talk to somebody about it. I was ashamed. I was embarrassed. Not that I wanted it to be encouraged in my life. I'm glad it wasn't encouraged, because then I might have made the same regretful decisions that Chloe made. But I would have liked to have felt like I wasn't the weirdest person in the world for having those issues. And I did. I did not feel like I could share that with anyone. And that made things probably worse for me. So I'm all for kids going to counseling and working those things out and sharing that with somebody and talking out their feelings, about what they're going through.
And also, in a lot of my conversations, or like the conversations I would overhear between other girls and women, they often spoke very negatively of being a woman in general, like about how difficult puberty is and periods and how scary it is to be pregnant and then give birth and then have all these expectations placed on you as a mother, and then start aging, start having these bodily changes, and then eventually go through menopause. And it was all painted in a very negative light. I never really heard about the blessings that came with any of these parts of being a woman.
I want to just encourage women, mothers, aunts, cousins, sisters, grandmothers, when your daughters, when your friends that are girls, that are young girls, that you have influence over, that whether you're youth leader or whatever, I really agree with Chloe on this. Try to just, tone down this negativity about being a woman. She mentions this, and I agree. I heard so much negative things about periods, about having children, about how hard it is to do that, sex, how scary it was, how painful it was for a lot of girls that would tell me these things before I had it. One woman even told me it's all for men, it's not even for you, that kind of thing. Just, and then menopause is awful too. It's just one thing after another. It seems like being a girl and then a woman is just a life of hell on earth. I think we really need to stop talking like that. I know there are some negative things. I'm going through menopause right now. I'm not enjoying all the aspects of that. There are some not fun things about it, but let's be more positive. Let's talk about the good things, because there are good things about all these stages of life. There really are. And becoming a woman is not a curse. Periods are not a curse. They signal your ability to have children. That's a blessing. It's a wonderful, beautiful, miraculous thing that I'm so glad that I did not cut myself off from. By doing these things to my body that I couldn't take back. At the time though, you couldn't have told me. I thought that all of that stuff was awful. And the stories I heard, again, from probably well-intentioned women and girls that were a little older than I was really not good. So let's be more careful. Just a word of wisdom to the girls out there and women over them. Let's be more wise about how we talk about being a woman.
I would also start seeing a lot of feminist content at this time, which kind of reinforced those same ideas, while also saying things that were pretty scary to me at the time, like, oh, we live under a patriarchy, we're being controlled by men and they don't care about us, they're taking away our rights. And with all this, I just wanted absolutely nothing to do with being a woman. I didn't want to grow into a woman. Why would I?
I agree with Chloe in that I did not want to be a mom. I wanted to be a boy. And even when I got past necessarily wanting to be a boy, I still was uncomfortable looking like a girl. And I certainly did not have any aspirations of ever being a mother. Ever. Not even. And if somebody had asked me when I was her age as well, when she was going through this transition, if they had asked me, would I ever, would I be okay removing my breast? Yes, I would have been. Yes, I would have been. I would have been okay removing my uterus at that point, because I had no desire to ever have children. I had no desire to do any of those things that a woman can do at that time. I really did not. I was afraid of sex. I had some really bad, disproportionate ideas about sex and men and how they would treat me, that all men were just monsters. They were just trying to get one thing from you and that's it. And you know what? Okay, there are certainly men like that out there. There are rapists and what have you, and there are just misogynist guys. But you know what? They're not all like that. And my husband is not like that. And all guys are not just wanting to get whatever they can out of a woman and use her and leave her. That is not the case. And so I needed to be encouraged that was not the case with all men. I needed to be encouraged that having a baby is a miracle. It's a miracle to have that life going inside, that baby kick. You know, I'm actually becoming a grandma in September, and I've been watching my daughter, grow this baby, and it's amazing. I got to go to an ultrasound and seeing that little life in there moving around. But it's a blessing overall. And I'm so glad that I didn't remove my chances of breastfeeding and my chances of having children. Chloe talks about possibly being infertile now because of the drugs that she was given. That's just unacceptable for a child to be consenting to that kind of thing so that later they won't be able to do that. They have no idea, as I had no idea, that you're going to want to do that later. You just don't know. There are some people who never want to, of course, but those are in the minority, first of all. And secondly, you need to be allowed to grow, develop, have your brain fully get where it's supposed to go, which happens fully finishes sometime in your 20s. Okay, so we need to give these kids a chance to grow up and realize who they are.
It's not like there's nothing positive about being female. There's plenty of positive about it, but it's easy to fall into a situation where all you hear is that, well, it's oppression, it's suffering, it's vulnerability, it's victimization. There's nothing about it that's positive at all.
Yeah, and a lot of these feminists would kind of downplay, I guess you could say, like the traditional role of a woman and the importance of motherhood, or even just fulfilling a maternal role. You know, I didn't really value that a lot growing up because I was the youngest of 5 kids, and I never really had to take care of anybody. I didn't really know what that felt like, and so I never really thought that I wanted to have kids until a few years later. After I stopped transitioning, actually, I realized that I did have a maternal instinct, and I really did want to be a mother and have blood children. And that was an instinct that wasn't really fostered or wasn't really allowed to grow at all because I was playing the role of a boy and also taking testosterone on top of that. The full picture of my mental health wasn't really explored at all, actually, throughout the course of my transition. And a lot of what I mentioned, I didn't even know was a problem until recently, until well after I stopped transitioning, and I was old enough to really be able to introspect well enough to figure out where it all stemmed from. But it was never explored by the adults who put me on this path. Roughly around that time, I expressed to my parents that, I'm not really satisfied. I want to go through with a medical transition. I want to go on hormones. And they actually pushed back on this at first. They were very cautious of this. They didn't know why I was pushing for it so much, and they wanted me to wait a little bit because at this point in time I was only 13 years old. I was quite young to be doing such a thing, and they stay that way until I got my gender dysphoria diagnosis. And during one of the appointments that they were there for, somebody who was involved in my transition, they told them that, like, oh, this is pretty much the only means of treating dysphoria. There was no regards to any alternative treatments. My dad asked about the regret rates, and they said they didn't even, I don't think they even used the word detransition. They said there's less than a 1% to 2% regret rate. And they also told my parents that if I wasn't allowed to go through with this, then I would be at risk of suicide.
Because every single one of those statements is a lie. So first of all, the American Psychological Association, in their guidelines for gender-affirming treatment, makes the case that, and because of prejudice, that there are no good long-term follow-up studies of transgender individuals. Okay, and they attribute that to prejudice against transgender individuals, which is not the reason, by the way. The reason is that there's a very low base rate, or there was, of transgender dysphoria, and the follow-up studies haven't been done in large part because the surgical and hormonal treatment regimen is relatively new. But there are no good long-term follow-up studies, and they actually complain about that. And then a couple pages later in the same document, they say that, well, it's necessary to affirm an alternate gender identity because otherwise the client or patient is at heightened risk of suicide. Okay, so first of all, both of those things can't be true. There's no way that people can know that suicide risk is elevated if gender transition is delayed unless the long-term studies are in place. And they already stated that the bloody long-term studies aren't in place. And the idea that we actually know from a research perspective that a child is much safer if they start transition than they are if they don't. That's just, again, that's simply not true. Ken Zucker's work has showed quite clearly that if you just leave the kids alone, then by the time they're 18 or 19, most of them settle into their biological identities. Now, so the reason I'm stressing this is because your parents, like many parents in this situation, were put in a very, very difficult position. And I would say it's corrupt to the point of malevolence, what the medical professionals are doing on this front. And that is the insistence, well, would you rather have a live trans child or a dead child? Which is, I don't think there's anything more toxic you can say to a parent than that, because that backs them into a corner. Because their alternatives are then, well, you can let your child go ahead with this absolutely life-altering hormonal and then surgical treatment, or your child can die, and it's your fault because you don't care enough. And parents, they're accustomed to trusting their medical professionals, at least to some degree, and accustomed to assuming that the knowledge they put forward is valid and reliable. And the information that your family was given was none of those. It's criminal, in my estimation, what you were told. Because there is simply no evidence that any of that is the case. There's no evidence that transitioning kids are less likely to be suicidal. There's no evidence that that's the only treatment path that works. And there's certainly no evidence that there's no alternative to transition or suicide. It's so pathological, I can't believe it. But it's no wonder your parents were pushed into a corner, because that's a dreadful choice for a parent to have to make.
These suicide stats that Jordan Peterson was referring to, they're just not there. I agree with him. He's telling the truth. They don't have this. They don't have the statistics yet, and the reason they don't have the statistics, hard word to say, is because there's not enough of this having happened. This is a relatively new thing, and so to say that kids will commit suicide if you don't get the surgery is just dishonest. It's intellectually dishonest because they don't know. They do not know. And I would suggest to you that there would be more likelihood as we see this unfold, and we will see it, but history will show us how this unfolds. The children that were exposed to this gender transition surgery and hormones, we will see how their lives play out. And I think my prediction is that we're going to see a lot of mass. You talk about attorneys jumping on this and suing doctors and counselors and therapists for pushing children into this and pushing their parents to do it. I think we're going to see mass lawsuits against these doctors. I think there's going to be suicide, sadly, because they did this irreversible surgery and hormonal damage to themselves, and that they can't change, that they can't alter.
I don't know if it's still true now that you need your parents to, if you're a minor, to sign off on forms for hormones or anything like that, because they're trying to push for kids being able to independently make that choice. Early a teenager, kids kind of tend to think that they're invincible. I started experiencing some complications that affect me of the changes that testosterone would bring on to
you also
my body.
said that there was a sexual element specifically. So was there something in your fantasies about what was that? Was that about you being a boy? You said
it was fantasies about being a man, about male and having masculine attributes to my body, and also a lot of it did involve like having like a female partner, which I never really explored in real life because I didn't have any emotional attraction to women. I didn't want to have a relationship with another woman, and so I never really cared to actually act it out.
Well, look, I mean, in adolescence, the range of sexual fantasy can be extremely broad. And there is a difference between fantasy and real life. I mean, people will fantasize about things that they won't do in their real life. And the mere fact that you were having those fantasies, that's not an indication of anything that's in and of itself pathological. That's still well within the realm of normative adolescent sexual fantasy, I would say.
Chloe mentions that she dated boys, though she had some strange attraction to girls, but it sounds like she did not act out on that. But then she had, in part because of the testosterone she was taking, I believe, and some other hormones that she should not have been having, were ramping up her sexual drive to unnatural levels, especially for a girl.
When you started taking the hormones, and how did you react to that?
I started having some physical changes, like with my appearance, and also some behavioral changes. Like I felt more confident. I started to develop kind of a competitive streak with, especially with boys my age, and I started to socialize just a little bit more like they did. And I also, obviously because I was taking androgens, I also started experiencing a very strong increase in my libido, and it was very difficult to keep up with.
I did not, thankfully, not have that access to that, because I had enough problem of my own.
It started to become a problem with me without me even realizing it. I did, unfortunately, develop an addiction to porn, and I also just had a very unhealthy relationship with my body and sexuality, and I still do to this day.
And I also had a porn addiction, as she talks about, and I had that because I had easy access to porn, sadly, even back in my day without the cell phones. I still was able to access porn through an unfortunate incident. And so I had access to that, and I did develop a porn addiction. And I think a lot of the reason was because, probably similarly to her, I was not really comfortable with myself, and I certainly was not comfortable with a guy that way. And so I dated boys, but we did not go to that direction at all. There was nothing past kissing in my arena with boys. And so I usually dated boys that were right around my age or younger and had no more sexual experience than I did. And I did that for a reason, because I did not want to be hurt, raped, molested, or anything. And so I was always trying to keep it within my control. And porn is a way to, to deal with your sexual frustration, sadly, without another person. And so that was an addiction that I had for that time when I was young. But it's very destructive, and I'm sad to hear that she's still struggling with that today. But it doesn't surprise me. It's very addictive and hard to get out of once you get into it.
But you had no interest in establishing a relationship with females, and on the dating front, you still wanted to, at least in principle, you still wanted to be with boys. Jesus, that's quite a confusing message to walk through. So, yeah, no kidding. You must have really been going in 5 directions at the same time during that period, boy.
Yeah.
I was pretty much only attracted to boys, with one exception. I had in treatment just a strange relationship. I mean, nothing happened, but I just felt like I wanted to be close to this other woman that I was in treatment with, and it really wasn't a sexual thing at all. It was really just, I want to be mothered, because I had that lacking in my life, and I really wanted to have that. And she made me feel, safe, and she was very mothering and nurturing. And so that's what I think I was attracted to. It was never a sexual thing. I was always attracted to guys in that way. And I think Chloe kind of established that as well, but she also didn't feel like a very attractive woman, nor did she think she wanted to be either, because she felt like that would make her vulnerable. So a very awkward thing, and that's what I was in. I just didn't go as far as she did, but I felt a lot of that confusion. And yes, I'm attracted to guys. I want to be with guys, but yet I'm scared to be with guys. I'm scared to be vulnerable with them. I'm scared to be feminine with them and all that, because that represents in my mind, and I think also in her, she was saying that represents too much vulnerability and possibly, being unsafe and feeling unsafe.
All right. So now while all this is happening, you're also marching down the transition pathway, right? So you went from blockers to testosterone, and then what?
Asked my mom to buy me a binder. They basically like squeeze the breasts to make them look flatter. Yeah. I wore those for about, I'd say, 2 years before getting a mastectomy, and I got sick of it. Like I would work out, I would swim, I would walk home in super hot weather and these things, and I just wanted to be done with it. Also, like I genuinely believed myself to be a boy. I wanted to look like a boy and be able to take my shirt off without any cares. And so about halfway through my sophomore year, I told my therapist that I was seeking a mastectomy, and through a gender specialist, I was referred to a surgeon.
A physiologically healthy young woman, and you've just announced that you want to undergo a form of radical surgery that's generally reserved for advanced stage cancer survivors. And the upshot of that is you're hustled off to a specialist who can facilitate that. There's no investigation into all the background issues that we've been talking about instead.
It was just seen as it was part of the process. Like there was really no psychological evaluation for it.
And this mastectomy that she had at 15, again, this is just absolutely tragic. She goes on to say that she has, some health issues with this now, that she doesn't know when will ever stop. She has no feeling now, no erogenous feeling in her chest. She will never be able to breastfeed. I mean, what a sad thing. My own mother chose not to breastfeed, but I did because I really wanted to see what it was like, and it was such a beautiful experience and such a bonding time with my daughters. I would not trade it ever. Was both of my children I did, and what a great thing to do. It's not only good for your bonding emotionally and so forth, but also just a good physical thing for your children. It really sets them in a good a way not to get sick as much and to protect against certain infections and stuff. So it's really a healthy thing to do. And she'll never be able to do that apart from a miracle. And so, I feel for her. This should not be something that somebody, certainly not under 18, should be allowed to do. And I am all for legislation that prevents this from any minors having access to such kind of surgery.
It's absolutely appalling what happened to you. There's no excuse whatsoever for it. It's such a dereliction of responsibility that it's almost unimaginable. Everything you told me about your unhappiness as a teenager, the fact that you were isolated in middle school, the fact that you had some doubts about your developing identity. It's like, yeah, that's pretty much par for the course for adolescents. Some kids get through it with a little less scarring than others, but most adolescents have a pretty damn miserable time for about 3 years.
I really had to laugh when I heard Jordan Peterson say, kids, in the ages of like 12 to, 15, somewhere in that area, it's a pretty damn miserable time. And, I have to agree. Most of the people that I know that are my age and went through adolescence about the same time we've talked about it, almost all of us would agree. Man, junior high, middle school, that kind of time. It was called junior high when we were back then, but now it's middle school. But anyway, the point is that age is so difficult. It's such a struggle for most people, regardless whether you have gender dysphoria or not. Add that to the pile and it becomes even more difficult. But it's just hard, right? And so let's not add to the struggle by making irreversible surgery changes and or hormonal changes that are not natural and are superseding what the God-given stuff that we're supposed to be able to deal with. Let's not throw our bodies into unnecessary hormonal changes, right? We've already got those going on.
Before I went under the knife, they did tell me that I was going to lose my ability to breastfeed, but it was like, I'm going to be a man, and men don't do that. I also wasn't really thinking about being a parent at all, because I was a kid. My endocrinologist asked me some questions that were very adult in nature. I was basically being sexualized by my doctors. It was like, are you aware that you may experience vaginal atrophy, or are you aware that this may affect your ability to have children as an adult? And I just went along with it. It was like, oh yeah, I know that. I don't plan on having kids, and I also I never had sex by that point, so I didn't know just what effect any of that would have on my body. But I was being treated as if I were an adult with the mental faculties to be able to consent to all this and understand what I was consenting to. But I wasn't. I was just a kid.
You know, Chloe says several times, I was just a kid. And she's right. She was a kid. And this is really criminal, I believe, what was done to her. And like I said, I believe we're going to see some pretty angry people as they grow up, as these kids. There may be some young people that are happy with their transition and after. But I'm hearing lots of stories over and over again, and parents coming out and saying, this is just a tragedy, this is a horrible thing that has been done to my child. And we're going to look at that more next week. We're going to look at that and talk about what the parents are going through that are having to deal with this.
Okay, and so what happened in the aftermath of the surgery? What was that like for you?
You know, when I woke up and I was fully conscious, all the meds had worn off, and I realized what just happened. But I was actually quite happy. You know, it was like, wow, this is a huge accomplishment. This is a huge step, and you know, I can finally be myself. And I was looking forward to being healed and eventually being able to go out and swim and work out and just hang out without a shirt and look like all the other boys and not have to worry about wearing this uncomfortable, restrictive thing. And, you know, it was an outpatient surgery. Got sent home pretty soon after that, and I had a comfy, I guess you'd say, few weeks after that, because my mom had to take some time off work to just help me around the house.
You laid out. So that's on the informed front, right?
Yeah, they really presented this as basically the only option to both me and my parents. And I also... The problem with me starting it so young was not only that I couldn't consent, I couldn't really fathom the full picture of things. I'm still experiencing a wide range of complications to this day. You know, from the surgery, you know, I'll never be able to breastfeed. I'll never have that erogenous sensation in my chest back. I'll never have my breast back. A reconstruction will do nothing for me, and it might make things worse actually, because I've had some complications pop up this year with the grafts. I have to cover them up with bandages, or else I don't know what's going on with them. I tried to consult my surgeon about it, and he didn't really investigate. He gave me advice that made the complications worse even, and actually temporarily gave me an infection. But I have to bandage up every day so that it doesn't like leak all over my clothing or bedding from the hormones and blockers. I've been experiencing some joint pains, mainly in my arms, my legs, and my back. I still have issues with my urinary tract. I have to use the restroom pretty frequently, and I didn't even know that this was possible. This is like a pretty huge quality of life issue that I'm experiencing, and I'm just not really getting any help for it. And on top of that, I do hate to speak about it, but
again, I believe that at the very least, a person needs to be at least 18 years old. And honestly, in my own opinion, I don't know that legislation would be able to go through for this, because it's hard enough to get legislation passed to keep minors protected from this. But I'm thinking 21 or older for this kind of life-altering surgery and hormones, because again, the child's brain is not finished developing until their 20s, and so to be able to give them the most possible best chance at making the best decision. Also, the longer we wait, the more we can see the actual statistics of what is happening to these children. We don't know right now. We really don't know. We are treading, in my opinion, where angels fear to tread. And I think we need to back up, and we need to chill out, and we need to let these kids be kids. And I'll just let Chloe close this up.
I'm experiencing sexual dysfunction at the age of 18. That's something that women usually go through when they're in their 40s to 50s. How is I supposed to know?